Arthuretta Holmes Martin is the primary author of the 2020 Virginia Democratic Party's resolution declaring racism a public health crisis. She's a professional speaker and storyteller who shares the power of personal narratives to heal, transform, and empower the listener. And we are so lucky that she is here today to heal, transform, and empower all of us. Welcome, Arthuretta Holmes Martin.
All the saints of God be gathering home. We will tell the story, how we overcome, and we'll understand it better by and by. That was one of my daddy's favorite tunes. He liked it because it told not just where we came from, it also talked about where we were and what we hope to accomplish. I was 18 years old when I did my first time going to the polls and voting. It was the first year that 18-year-olds could vote, and I voted for Jimmy Carter. It wouldn't have been Daddy if he didn't tell me a story on the way to the polls. He told me when he was 18, he couldn't vote. And when he came back from the war, World War II, it wasn't that he wasn't legally able to vote. It was that the folks in South Carolina wouldn't let him vote. He told me how he and his twin brother, Jim, just knew that because they had served this country with pride and had been on a naval ship that they were going to be able to vote. So they proudly put on their uniform and they went down to that polling place to register. And the people stood in front of the door and said, if you register to vote, we're going to hang you. Of course, they had some other explicit language that I won't repeat, but it told my father something. It told him that as a man with black skin, even though he fights for this country and sacrifices his life for this country, at that time, he was not going to be given the right to have a voice in the elected officials that ran this country. Daddy and Uncle Jim didn't vote that day. They went on, and Uncle Jim and Daddy went on to get undergraduate degrees with the GI Bill after the Korean conflict, and both of them actually went on to get PhDs in philosophy. They became ministers. They eventually got the right to vote. But it wasn't until after a lot of hard-fought battles. One of the battles that happened was with Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, you see, because during the 60s when Daddy was in Atlanta, Georgia, and by that time he could vote in Georgia, depending on who was running and who was running the polls and all kinds of unsundry things that made it not a given that you were going to be able to go down and vote. Miss Hamer was demanding the right to vote through the Student Nonviolent Coalition Committee, SNCC. Miss Fannie Hamer, that was a tough woman. She's always given the acclimates of saying she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And she did give that testimony before the Democratic Convention to be seated as delegates in Atlantic City. But she did so much more. She told a little girl that it was okay to come from a different place and fight for what you believed in. She was not the only one. There was Shirley Chisholm in New York who was fighting. There was Eleanor Holmes Norton who was fighting. And then there were women before them who fought, whose names we don't even know. But that right to vote was something that was dear and near to my father's heart. There has not been one year that I have not voted. because my father and my mother instilled in me the need to vote and the power of the vote. The last time my father voted, he was 87 years old. I was taking care of him in North Carolina. His eyesight had gone a little bit. I had to push him in a wheelchair to get to the polling place. It was in Raleigh, North Carolina. I remember getting assigned permission so that I could fill in the dots for him to make sure that I voted for the person that he wanted me to vote for. This wasn't a presidential election. This was a local election. But Daddy instilled in me the importance of voting. Let me just say this. A lot of people take this thing called voting for granted. I've always been of the opinion that if it's something worth fighting for, they will definitely put obstacles up to you accomplishing it. There are plenty of obstacles that are being placed before us to vote. We no longer have poll taxes and we no longer have literacy taxes, but we do have reduced places to vote. People are disenfranchised because of minor criminal infractions that are created to make it harder to vote. People standing in long lines and not being able to fill out mailing registration. It's a lot that Fannie Lou Hamer would tell us today, and a lot that song will understand it better by and by, will tell us today about what it is we need to do. We should never, ever forget where we came from, as she said. And we need to praise the bridges that carried us over. She, my father, John Lewis, Elijah Cummings, Julian Bond, Dr. Martin Luther King, so many others. Because if I begin to name all the names, I'll be here forever. Let me just say, they are all understanding together by and by. By and by, when the morning comes, all the saints of God are gathering home. They are telling the story, how they overcome, and they're understanding better by and by.